What if I told you that the fantastical fairy tales and terrifying mythological monsters from the ancient world weren't just wild imaginations, but deeply encrypted historical records? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding a massive historical mystery of the ancient Middle East, peeling back the layers of legend to reveal the bloody, real-world birth of a civilization. Okay, let's dive right into this. We've all heard stories of heroes battling giant, fire-breathing dragons, right? But what if we looked at these myths not as fantasy, but as a secret code? What if the dragon was actually a brutal foreign military? What if the magic was just ancient politics? Just listen to this ancient description. Azhidahak Bivarasp, the thousand-horse dragon who ruled over the Iranian lands with force and oppression for 1,000 years. Wow, sounds absolutely terrifying, doesn't it? A monstrous beast hoarding power for a millennium. But hold on to that image, because a bit later in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and unmask exactly who or what this thousand-horse dragon really was in the physical world. Section 1. The Universal Search for Origins. To decode the dragon, we first have to understand how ancient peoples used myths to ask one big question. Where did we come from? Every ancient culture crafted an origin story to legitimize their society. The Sumerians claimed their god-kings descended directly from heaven to rule the world. The Hebrew myth, written down during the Achaemenid period, described the first man, Adam, as being created completely whole from clay, instantly equipped with wisdom, setting up a lineage of chosen prophets. And later Islamic myths positioned creation beginning from water, with Mecca as the absolute axis of the universe. You see, these stories weren't just faith, they were ancient political foundations. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Humans sprouting from the earth. Because the ancient Iranian creation myth took a radically different, entirely nature-based approach to how humanity began. While Semitic myths featured a fully formed human instantly created from clay, ancient Iranians closely observed nature. They noticed that all life sprouts from the soil. So their myth states that the first being, Gaia Maritan, sprouted from the earth exactly like a plant. When he died, a male-female pair named Mashya and Mashyana grew from his remains. At first, they were plant-like, but they slowly transformed and evolved into human form. It's an incredibly unique, evolutionary way to view human origins. Section 3. Jamshid in the Golden Age. Now, as humanity grew and formed tribes, they naturally needed leadership. And a simple linguistic misunderstanding actually hid their first great king for centuries. The legendary figure Jamshid was originally called Yima Kashaita. What's really interesting here is that for a long time, translators thought Kashaita meant shining, but decoded Achaemenid the inscriptions from Darius the Great prove that Kashaita actually means king. So Jamshid wasn't just some magical glowing entity, he was a real political monarch forming the first great union. Historically speaking, Jamshid united the early Aryan tribes in the east, likely near the Helmand River. The myth says he banished disease, created immense prosperity, and expanded his realm 3 times over. But here is his fatal, tragic flaw. The myth states the splendor of his own power completely deceived him. He became arrogant, demanded to be worshipped as a god, and began treating his people like servants just to extract taxes. Because of this extreme arrogance, his divine glory, his heavenly support, was entirely stripped away. And that vulnerability? Well, that's what summoned our monster. Which brings us to Section 4, the Thousand-Horse Dragon. Jamshid's kingdom was fractured by his own ego, leaving the gates wide open for Azhidahak to strike. The myths say this beast crushed Jamshid and ruled over the Iranians with brutal oppression for 1,000 years. Now, this staggering number isn't meant to be the literal lifespan of a reptile. It represents a horrifying, generation-spanning dark age for the Iranian people, a deep historical trauma burned right into their collective memory. All right, let's finally unmask the monster. The thousand-horse dragon was actually the brutally oppressive Khuzi, or Elamite Empire from the south. Jamshid's expansion had bumped right up against this ancient superpower. In reality, the Elamites violently invaded to control the highly lucrative lapis lazuli trade routes in the east. The hatred for this invasion was so intense, so visceral, that the Elamite military force was permanently remembered in myth as a bloodthirsty dragon, one that likely burned down great early civilizations like Shahr-e Sukhteh. And when we map the myths to recorded history, the timeline perfectly aligns. In the mid-2nd millennium BCE, Jamshid's union falls. The late 2nd millennium BCE is the long, dark period of Elamite domination, the dragon's rule. But as we move into the early 1st millennium BCE, a vital spark of rebellion finally ignites among the Arya Zanta tribes in central Iran. Section 5. Faridun and the Rebellion. To slay a dragon, you need a hero. Enter Faradon. The crucial point here is that Faradin wasn't a wizard or a magical demigod. He held the title of Kavi, which simply means the head of a rural union. His ancient name, Tredaona, literally translates to the unifier of three tribal unions. He was a brilliant, real-world chieftain who managed to unite three massive, fractured tribes in the region between Ray and Isfahan to finally fight back against their oppressors. Faradun's rebellion was an absolute masterclass in ancient nation building. First, he unites the Aryas onto tribes. Second, they utterly defeat the Elamite ruler. But I want you to notice the cultural myth-making here. Unlike other ancient cultures that constantly boast of tearing their enemies limb from limb, the Iranian myth specifically notes they merely bound and imprisoned the dragon in Mount Damavand, highlighting a really unique cultural ideal of restraint over vengeance. Finally, Faradun steps down and divides the newly freed kingdom among his three sons. Section 6. Forging the First Empire. But as history always shows us, winning freedom is only half the battle. Surviving the aftermath is where the real struggle begins. Faradin's division of the kingdom led to immediate chaotic civilizational struggle. The myth tells us that Faradin gave the best land, Iran, to his son Iraj. His jealous brothers, ruling neighboring lands, murder Iraj, kicking off the legendary, bloody Iran-Turan wars. But historically, this was no family feud. It actually represents real Tauriya tribes from the east, desperately pushing into Arya Zenanta lands to secure resources. This was a painful birth period for the civilization, forcing these defensive tribes to evolve, centralize, and eventually forge the political structures that would become the mighty Median and Achaemenid empires. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate takeaway from all these decoded myths. Out of the ashes of Jamshid's arrogance and the dragon's oppression, a totally unique political theory was born: the just king. In ancient Iranian thought, a ruler isn't a god. They must be humble and serve the people like a father. If they succumb to arrogance or tyranny, they lose their divine glory, and their dynasty will inevitably collapse. It's a foundational philosophy of justice that shaped the region for millennia. So, we've successfully decoded the thousand-horse dragon today, but I want to leave you with this to think about. Look closely at the myths of your own culture. What hidden histories, ancient empires, and forgotten border wars are secretly encrypted in the fairy tales you were told as a child? If you enjoyed this explainer and learned something new, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and share this explainer with someone who would enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on RedBook-Global.